All right, we are sort of live in the future. This is pre-recorded. I am here for Church for Atheists. This is ExmoJoe, and I have LJ Saurman. LJ, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I've been looking forward to this conversation, actually. Time will tell if that's warranted, so no pressure.
Okay.
Uh, those of you who don't know are in the sorry position of not knowing. LJ Saurman is a freshman at BYU, majoring in philosophy and an aspiring theologian. Cool. Hell of a buck in that racket, let me tell you. He was born in Hawaii and grew up in Maryland, England, Alabama, Canada, and Montana. So only foreign countries. And graduated high school in Kansas. So good. At least came around to America. America, I should say. He served a 2-year mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from 2022 and 24. Oh, baby. In the Hungary Budapest mission. In his, I should get extra points for how I pronounce Budapest.
Yeah, good job. Good job.
In his free time, he enjoys reading, spending time with friends, and talking to people about why they do or do not believe in God. I can, as a sometime hate watcher of his YouTube channel, I can attest to that. He also hosts the Rational Theology Podcast, which features interviews with prominent philosophers, theologians, and historians of various Christian traditions. I can also vouch for that. It's actually started out one of my favorite. It started out one of my favorite hate watches when you were brand new, and became very quickly kind of a guilty pleasure for me because I'm going to tell you this, LJ, and you can tell your bishop, your stake president, your professors, anybody you want, and say, I had no idea who was going to blindside me with that. Okay. But like, you are actually a smart guy. And I have been surprised at how often I found myself talking with people in the ex-Mormon world and saying, you gotta check out this channel, because it's like if Jacob Hansen were as smart as he thinks he is, and like at least 15 years younger. And no, and I say that as a guy who's had Jacob on my show. Jacob, I know you and I, we have this friendly rivalry thing here. And I do try to keep it friendly with Jacob, because Jacob is smarter than your average apologist. I'll give him that. And so on that side, it was fun for me to engage with him in the past. So that's why I'm a little bit excited for this conversation. No pressure.
Okay.
But I will say this: if you guys don't check it out, if you haven't checked it out, Rational Theology Podcast. Did I say that right? Rational Theology Podcast on YouTube. Also, I'm guessing, is it on podcast platforms? It's a proper podcast.
It's on Spotify.
So. Okay, yeah, that counts. That counts. Biggest podcast platform in the world, I think, at this point, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really good. I gotta say this, okay, because we're gonna get really serious here, and things are gonna get really wild. Because like I discovered this, and I said, okay, that's it. I'm talking to this guy on Church for Atheists. Is that I watched your channel trailer for your channel finally, after I've watched all of your shows, probably left some trolling comments as the Church of Korihors, some of them probably unfair. That's me. Anybody says that, if anybody says my trolling is unfair and mean-spirited, I'm just going to right now cop to it and say, yeah, that's me. Sorry about that. But then I'm like, okay, I guess I better find out what Rational Theology Podcast and who this guy is and your story. And I was like seriously moved by your story and your testimony about the church. And I don't get moved by testimony very often these days.
Yeah.
I did once upon a time. But I was like, this guy is serious, he's sincere, and he's really in a sincere pursuit of the truth and smart. And so I'm like, this is respectable. I think less trolling, more friendly. So I'm leaning into that. Then I started watching. I reached out to you, and then you published some clips of you arguing with antis, other antis. I didn't wind up going to Salt Lake for this conference. I had planned on doing it on Sunday, and then I was just like, no, this is silly. I'm not doing that. And then I saw you arguing with evangelicals. And I went, oh, this is good. I mean, this is good. When you got into it with that guy about about Exodus not being entirely sustainable from an archaeological standpoint, and he went into, didn't Jesus quote from Moses and quote from and I was
Yeah.
like, I guess maybe he did. And you were like, I don't know if he did or didn't. It seems to me you said, and then you said, but Jesus talked about Job too. And I went, oh shit. That was pretty good. I was impressed. I was impressed.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
kudos to you.
Thank
So
you.
a big part of your story, and I don't want to speak for you, is just as a primer, that it resonated with me because it's very similar to mine. And I'll lead you out because you don't know really hardly anything about me, and I'm not surprised. That's fine. That's fine. Everybody learns about ExmoJoe in their own time. ExmoJoe takes time.
Yeah.
When I was about 14, I had a serious depression, emotional crisis that pretty much has followed me throughout the rest of my life. I don't want to scare you, LJ, but I'm significantly older than you. Just a quick perspective of that for you. I served my mission in 99 to 2001. So,
Ooh, dang.
yeah. So, I found Jesus at 14 in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A big part of my teenage survival I can really attribute to religion, to Mormonism, which I do consider Christianity. So anybody out there who wants to play that game, you can go against me and LJ together. We'll take you on. It will not be pretty. And then I went on my mission, and I lost my faith in God on my mission in Peru.
Oh, really?
And yeah, but it was, the church kind of became my way of coping with my depression in my teenage years. And then when I went on my mission, that faltered for me, and it became existentially bad. And I've talked about that enough. My audience has heard me talk about it, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse. But it seems to me like that resonated with your story, and I wanted to switch over talking about your experience. Does that resonate with you? What was your experience?
Yeah. I mean, so I was, probably, I'm assuming you were also born into the church.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was born into the church, kind of just, went to church because, you're a kid, you have to go where your parents go.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, yeah, I also kind of got pretty bad depression like my first year of high school due to a whole set of circumstances. But yeah, and so I was just pretty, just very lonely. Was certainly, that's probably the best word to describe it. It was a painful loneliness that always seemed to cloud me. And so yeah, it was just a bad year. And also, I'd kind of resolved before that school year had started that I was going to compromise some of my, church values or whatever. And so that kind of, I think in retrospect, in some way contributed to my sadness, my loneliness. But then uh, that summer, my parents had me go to EFY, right? And it's kind of cliche, but I went to EFY, had to read the scriptures for the first time by myself, and in doing so, I still remember looking in the gospel library search tab, loneliness. I was like, how can I address this problem?
Mm.
And so I still remember I listened to this one talk by Jeffrey R. Holland from 2009. None were with him, and he details the Via Dolorosa, right, when Christ is going um, on the path to Calvary, previously in Gethsemane, and just talks about how lonely Christ had been and the fact that he descended below all. And so, just in hearing that story and reading other scriptures, I had a couple of scriptures I kind of clung to from that week. I had a pretty deep kind of born again experience almost, where I was like, oh my goodness, this Jesus Christ figure, Jesus of Nazareth, I really do believe is the Son of God. I do believe that he suffered my pains in all of this. And so, my depression didn't go away immediately. Like the next year, it kind of was even worse, I'd say. But I did have this kind of spiritual anchor, this rock. And I kind of developed this distinction between the terms joy and happiness. I was like, I'm certainly not happy by any means, but I'd say I have this deep abiding joy that I'd found in this anchor of Jesus Christ, which had been given to me by the church. So that was essentially my initial conversion to Christianity. And then, I went on my mission. And I still remember in my stake president interview, he's asking me all the testimony questions, and then it got to like Joseph Smith, and he's like, "Do you think Joseph Smith is a prophet?" And I'm like, "Well, I'd imagine he is, but I can't say that with the same certainty I can say, God exists or Christ is the Savior." And he was like, he appreciated the honesty, and so we talked about it a little bit. But that's kind of where I was at the beginning of my mission. And then on the mission, uh, went to Hungary, so not the easiest, not the most materially successful mission, and so it's kind of hard. But I remember there's this one week we were working really hard, and then we had a bunch of lessons, and it was really weird because everybody in all the lessons told me I was deceived, and so that kind of kicked off like this. It wasn't. I never really questioned the existence of God during that period, because, and I guess I should add, in addition to that kind of initial conversion as a 14-year-old, I also, especially as a junior and senior, really started um, doing Mormon's challenge in Moroni 7, where he says, "Pray to the Father with all the energy of your heart that you may be filled with charity." Because I used to be kind of a misanthrope. I used to really not like people. But then after doing that and really pleading with God to allow me to love others as he loves people, whether or not this was all psychological, whether or not, I choose to attribute it to the gift of God. I really got to a place over time, gradually, where I really I love people. And I don't know that could have happened without a God, or at least that's kind of how I choose to interpret it. Right. But so,
Mhm.
I on the mission, I didn't really question the existence of God. I felt like I had pretty solid grounding for believing in God. It was more of a denominational thing. And I was like, okay, I got to look into this Joseph Smith guy. It's kind of sketchy. I really did not like, like most Mormons, probably, I felt very uncomfortable when church history was brought up or things. And so, but after that point, I really got into it and started looking into what other Christian denominations believed. And I guess, long story short, after a period of probably like 4 or 5 months ish of just reading stuff, listening to stuff, whatever, I came to a point where I was pretty much, continued to be deeper converted to Jesus, and converted pretty much the first time to the restoration, and to the idea that Joseph Smith really was a prophet. Certainly not a perfect guy by any means, but he did some good stuff, I think. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, there's a whole conversation we could unpack there, because the same conversation that I referred to, but you're going up to Temple Square, where you were talking about basically, in layman's terms, because I'm going to dumb it down for me and for the world. You're basically talking about how Scripture is made, and I was impressed at how you kind of make the case. I feel like Alex O'Connor, my fellow atheist. Welcome on the show, Church for Atheists. Anytime, Alex. We have we'll have some beef to unload, but I like you. You seem cool. But it's something that I feel like he has really unpacked with the whole Jacob Hansen thing, and I'm on record for having talked about this. It's like the Book of Mormon has problems in terms of the historiography. I'd say that's about as generous and generalized as I can be on that subject. That I think we can at least say in each other's presence, being this is, and I won't make you swear on pain of perjury, the first time you and I've had a face-to-face conversation. But the thing that you were talking about, I got this distinction from you of something I have said, something I feel Alex has said, something I feel like needs to be said. strangely almost in defense of the Book of Mormon, is that yes, there are historiography problems, there are anachronisms, there are problems with the claims of the origins of the Book of Mormon. But any Christian who thinks that the Gospels are any better than that has got to take a more honest look at the history of the
Yeah.
Gospels, certainly, and of the Old Testament. I will go to say in defense of the Old Testament that I don't buy that the 5 books of Moses, and certainly the major or minor prophets, that any of these were meant to be understood as history in the way that we in a modern context understand history to begin with. That's
Mhm.
my take on it as a very armchair historian. That's the armchair right over there. Okay. But I mean, there's a whole conversation I think would be fascinating to see, because it seemed to me like your faith, as you were talking to this guy, to this evangelical, well, you were very good about not casting your pearls before swine, but you did indicate to it. And you're like, yes, I get that there are problems, but I believe because I have faith. And I went, fair enough. You know, I at one point in my life would have been that toxic atheist who went and says, no, we're going to talk about critical thinking now, and you and I are going to break this down. And but I'm like, you know what? He needs that in his life right now. This, where your spiritual journey is, I dig it, and that's your spiritual journey for the rest of your life. It'll take you where it takes you. And I'm like, but for these Christians who say no, but ours is based on the Bible, so it's more secure, just don't know the history of how these documents came about, right? So,
Yeah.
and I feel like you really do. Just listening to you, I'm like, oh no. I mean, I listening to you talk with actual theologians on your show, like you've had Blake Ostler on your show, and you've had people who have studied theology on your program. You've obviously read a lot of theology. I look at them, I'm like, okay, this is intimidating. This guy's read a lot more theology than I have. Like, you've read a lot more than I have. Now, of course, it's part of your studies, but I'm like, okay, it's a little intimidating. Like, if this guy and I were to have even a casual argument, I'd have to do some reading just to get caught up. But it's interesting. I do think that some of these things are interesting. But we're talking about, though. I'm curious about, on your mission, you talk about that you listened to some things, and you read some things in terms of your faith in the restoration. And we were talking, I mean, we'd started in that on kind of an existential bent. Does it seem to you like for missionaries, the doubts about Joseph, whether that's Joseph Smith or about God or about the Bible or about any particular doctrinal point, that the stakes are higher because you're out here not only putting it to the test as to whether, not only putting it to the test in terms of can persuade other people to believe in it, but also the motivational, that inside fire that goes, I'm going to get up every day. I'm going to take this prime time of my life and the energy in my body and mind to go out there and convince people of this. Is it a spiritual crisis, or is it purely, cognitive?
Um, I don't know. I think in terms of, like, how do you mean exactly?
Okay, how would you? Let's start here, because this is where it pays off to talk to somebody who has done some reading about theology. What do you define spiritual to be?
Spiritual? That's a
Yeah.
good question. I don't know that I've ever really pinned that down. I'd say spiritual to me. So we have like the five senses, right? But to me, I think there's kind of this sixth sense, which I might define as a spiritual side. And I think everybody has some sort of a spiritual side, right? I think if you get moved to tears by music, if you get moved to tears by some sort of beautiful art, nature, whatever it is, I think there's a spiritual element to that, right? I think, but in terms of theologically spiritual, I'd say so. When I say, like, for example, when I was talking to Paul G, that one anti-Mormon guy, I kept bringing up how I didn't know the Book of Mormon is true because of facts or evidence necessarily, but rather because of a spiritual witness, right? And so what I mean by that is there's kind of these spiritual experiences I've been able to have, and I know that not everybody has been able to have spiritual experiences, but it's a sort of experience that I can't exactly describe, nor do I think I'm supposed to be able to describe it. But essentially, it's kind of this, in my view, this higher form of knowledge, to where it's like you've got the five senses, but then if you're tapped into the spiritual experience, it's this purer form of knowledge. And I know this is a very subjective claim, right? But to me, it's like, so for example, in my initial conversion, um, I was, reading resources about Jesus, and then I had this insane euphoric feeling, some sort of crazy feeling I've never felt to this point. And I didn't hear a voice or anything, but intuitively I knew this is the love of God for you, and this is the love of Jesus Christ for you. And so it was. And so when I say spiritual, I think it's um, oftentimes people don't. They'll equate tears with spirituality, or they'll equate this or that with spirituality. I think in reality, it's kind of this higher form of communication that you have to learn how to tap into. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah. I think that, that's very useful. I would agree with you probably on most of that. Of course, I'm an atheist now. But there's this book, Varieties of Religious Experience, by William James.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've read it. I'm only partway through it. It's really eye-opening for me, because I've had a lot of criticism of James in the past, but without having actually read James.
Yeah.
But now that I have had chance to read it a little bit, I get what I feel like I really do get where he was going with it. But he defined basically a spiritual experience as any awesome experience that's hard to describe in words, that
Mhm.
leaves the experiencer, transformed.
Yeah.
And he talks about how in psychology, because of course William James is the father of American psychology. That's the way they call it. That's why people say it. He basically brought Freudianism to America with a whole new lens. And most of what we know as psychotherapy really goes back to James in some form or another. And he basically makes the case in this lecture series that you can pathologize spiritual experiences. You can look at it from the lens of mental illness, and there's cheese down that tunnel. You can look into the experiences of the saints and say that's autism. Well, he wouldn't have said autism back then, right? But you can say that's schizophrenia. That's depression over there. That's autism. That's whatever, right? This is what these people are experiencing. What they're experiencing is mental illness, and epilepsy is another one that he specifically brought up, because a lot of people have said in history that Paul's experience on the road to Damascus probably was epilepsy. And he's like, you could do that. You could pick this all apart like that. And what would you have actually done for the world and for the people who experience it? Because basically what you're doing without intending to is causing people to doubt experiences that, whether they are mental illness or not, whether they're caused by chemicals in your brain and interactions in your body or not, or their actual communication with God, it makes a positive change in their life. And if you're doing something that detracts from the positivity of that change, you're causing harm, no matter how you want to do it, no matter how you want to define that. So yes, we can pathologize spiritual experiences and make them into basically forms of mental illness, but why would we, right? Even if you could. And so I'm like, that's very useful, even if you do believe, as I do, that most of these things probably are. That depression, you can say depression, I think people would be prone to believe, you tell me if you think this is wrong, that depression has to do with chemicals in your brain and or trauma and an experience in your life over here, and spirituality has to do with this ethereal connection to the divine over here, and nary the twain shall meet. I don't think that that is a modern perspective of spirituality in general. I think you have to take them together. Do you think I'm crazy there?
I think that makes sense. Yeah, and I'm not biologically not sound on my biology enough to really be able to weigh in super intelligently, but I do think that spirituality is inevitably mixed with the mental, the physical. Every part of you, I think, is going to influence your spirituality.
Yeah. I mean, if you're hungry, that doesn't cut you off from God, if God is real. But if you get bad enough, it would definitely even if that connection to God were real, it could cloud it after a while. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
I believe in God, but I'm also hungry, right? Any you know, and whether or not there's a spiritual essence, a spiritual substance to the being, or an ontological difference between you, the body, and you, the being who could have existed, not have existed. um Even if you could separate those out, you're never going to while you're alive, are you? So you kind of have to take them together.
Hmm.
And so I look at that and I say, so a spiritual crisis for a lot of people comes down to questions about whether or not you're going to carry on living.
Hmm.
And it has to do with whether or not you're going to make major life decisions, like people coming out of the closet as gay or as trans. That's going to be a spiritual experience because they have this awesome, hard to describe in words experience that leaves them transformed. So they're spiritual. So you have all these different spiritual journeys, and your psyche and your brain chemistry and so forth are part of it. They're necessarily a part of it. And the experiences that we have are like mileposts on that journey. It's the way I look at it. And on my experience on my mission, there were these moments where I can look back now, 25 years separated from it, and say, these are the moments where if I had known how to reach out for help, I probably would have gotten it. And, I could see where my autism contributed to my not being able to communicate effectively a need for help. And so I look at that and say, well, crap. So if I'd have done these, would I be a Mormon today? And I can say honestly, looking at it, and I can look at it and honestly say, no, I'd have figured it out eventually. But I don't know that, right? I
Hmm.
don't. I really can't speak for that Joe. That Joe is having a very different experience than I'm having. But chances are, from what I can see about other people's experiences, suffering would have been a part of it, and very much so. I guess where I'm going at with this is your distinction on this side. Okay, you said something about, I don't know that, forgive me for misquoting you, I don't know that I am happy or that I was happy, but I was experiencing joy, and I see those as a different thing. And that
Hmm.
really resonates with me, LJ, because I also, like, even today I feel that, like, it's like I I think like the philosophers, like the Greek philosophers, we used to say, they say that the Greeks, look at me, I'm talking to somebody who studies philosophy, but there's a really good modern philosopher, Alain de Botton, who talks a lot about this in his work at the School of Life. And he talks about, the Greeks didn't really talk about happiness, and they didn't really think that you should seek happiness. You should seek eudaimonia, which I understand as being a state at which basically, yes, you're suffering, as all beings suffer, but it's worthwhile. And in that regard, I'm like, damn, but that isn't that exactly what everybody is after? Whether you're working in psychology, whether you're working in church work, whatever you're doing, even your own personal work, you're trying to find a reason why suffering should be justified, not just from a big picture perspective, but you and your life. How would you say that this joy that you're describing there on your mission, if you're going back to your missionary experience, how would you say that that is different from being happy?
Yeah. So I think a simple way I would explain my distinction between the happiness and joy is I'm happy when I eat some chocolate, right? Or I'm happy when I don't know, let's say, listen to my favorite song. I'm happy when somebody compliments me, right? Those are things. simple examples of happiness, right? It's like, oh, you feel like this little boost or whatever. And now joy, though, at least in the way I've defined it and made this distinction, joy is more this continuous um, kind of, I don't even know how exactly to describe it. I like to use like it's like an anchor. It's like a just this steadfast. I don't even know. Let me think of how I should word this. It's like I can be very sad but have this joy. And I guess the joy is just this, it's like a safety net almost, where even though you're being dragged down, you've got this safety net and you can feel it. And you're like, and it could be different for different people. But for me, it's like Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, the historical figure, came to this earth and he suffered for my sins, for my infirmities, and he knows what I'm going through. And not only that, the reason he did that is because he loves me and because he wants me to become as he is, perfected in all the moral attributes. And so essentially that's kind of what I mean by joy. Is it's more this, I guess it's almost synonymous with like a sustaining faith, right? Where it's like you have this one item that regardless of what happens, um, you can cling on to it, you can hold on to it. And so you're never going to, you know, um, do things to yourself or let things sort of affect you in certain ways, because you have this hope, this faith, this joy that sustains you regardless of how happy or sad you may be. And so that's kind of the distinction I make, where it's like, um, even though I might have this great joy, that doesn't mean I'm always going to be necessarily smiley or necessarily feeling good. It's very interesting. It's like you can be in the depths of depression and have this abiding joy that sustains you from second to second. So
It sounds like that's interesting. Thank you for saying it that way. That is that's actually inspirational, to be honest with you. And so it seems to me like that's really about meaning. Would you say that that's about right? I mean, that basically you like your faith in the atonement and in the love of Christ, provides a meaning for whatever else you may be going through, good or bad.
yeah, I mean, it's certainly this higher celestial form of purpose, right? And I suppose you could find that in other things as well, right? Like I guess I don't know. I've never put myself in the atheist shoes to see what sort of thing you could make your rock like that. But just in my experience, it's always been Christ. Or I guess if you're Muslim, for example, it could be you don't have Christ as a savior figure. It could just be Allah, like God in general. Um, or yeah, I'm curious. Do you have some sort of a like a thing like this?
Something that provides like an enduring meaning.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would say if anything, I would say death is probably one, which sounds really dark.
Interesting.
It is
Yeah.
dark, but like I look at life and I say, okay, we have a phrase in the Church of Korihors. We say you should flash bright, and that's like become almost like it would start out as a playful thing, just saying like as a God bless kind of thing. Instead of God bless, we say flash bright, and that is. But the core of it is you exude light, like physical light, into the universe. Symbolically, I use that symbolically to say it's creativity, even if free will doesn't exist, and I'm a compatibilist personally. But so I don't think free will actually exists, but I don't
Mm,
think that any good will come from treating it like it doesn't exist. So,
right.
right. And so, even if it doesn't exist, there's no denying that. Well, there is denying, I guess, at some point, but let us presume I exist and that, as far as I know, I exist from cradle to the grave. So I am radiating this creative light into the universe only from this point to that point, and a very small amount of time in the grand cosmic scale of things. So I flash. You flash, I flash, we flash. Beings that didn't have to exist, I think. I don't know. Uh, but we do. We seem to, at least. So you might as well flash bright. And so for me, I look at that and I say, is that the same as saying, well, Jesus loves me, God has a plan for me, and anything as firm and concrete as that? No. Is that anything that causes you to feel as much meaning as I think I once did with the gospel? No, I really can't say that it does. But it feels honest to me, and that for me is more important. And
Okay.
so, but so yeah, but I mean about your experience though. So I mean, I look at this and I say, the process of making the sausage of faith, as I sometimes call it, of actually going out there and convincing other people and persuading other people to believe in it, in the gospel, and in particularly in the restoration. It really can make it so that you never want to eat that sausage again, because for me, like learning the commitment pattern, applying the commitment pattern, I remember a lot of times thinking, is anybody else going through the spiritual crisis that I am, and we're just not talking about it? Which now is, 25 years out of the mission, I could say I know that for a fact. It's like most of the ex-Mormon ex-Mormons who were missionaries, I could say have resonated with that to me. That, oh yeah, every time I knew a guy who said every time I bore my testimony, I was lying, and I went, I mean that floored me as a
Yeah.
godless atheist Exmo. I went, are you serious? Every time? And he's like, yeah, you too. I'm like, no, don't throw me in with that, man. I was trying to be honest, but I was like, I had a relationship with Christ, I thought, anyways. And so, I say to some people, I've said in the past, and I don't want to harp on about my experience because I'm more interested in yours. But for me, when God died, when my Heavenly Father died, and there was no funeral, I was furious. I was livid. I mean, it may seem like sometimes I'll talk about, oh, the day I threw my garments away, it was like the best day of my life or whatever. But I'm just being cheeky to have fun. But the truth is, I felt it was like my father had died, and no one said anything, and there was no funeral for it, and there was a grieving process there. And for people who are like when we were on our missions, those of us who've gone on missions, I feel like there really is a grieving process there. You have to leave, like St. Paul says, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I played as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. To be a missionary, you kind of have to do that, not just in terms of the things you do with your time, but emotionally and spiritually. You have to decide, I'm not a kid anymore. I gotta be a man. I gotta go out there and do this work. And that is a real challenge. And I worry because I send nieces and nephews off on missions, and I see them, and some of them, it's the first time they hear from their Uncle Joe is the day I say, hey, so you're going on a mission. Your atheist ex-Mormon Uncle Joe who never shows up for things and is kind of out of pocket all your life. Hi, that's me, Uncle Joe. I just want you to know that I hope you have a great time. I want you to know that the mission can be the best time in your life. Some of my best experiences happened on my mission in Peru. I I hope this is a grand adventure for you, and I'm so excited for you. And I'm just going to leave it at that with this small caveat. If you need someone to talk to, reach out to absolutely anybody and say, I'm struggling and I need help. Don't wait on it. Don't delay. Reach out for help, because without telling you my whole experience that I wrote a whole 500-page book about, uh, it can get dark fast. And for what it's worth, it's not true that you'd be better off sent home in a pine box than not at all. For a lot of us from my generation, I'm curious if this is true for your generation, or maybe for you personally. I don't ask you to speak for everybody. A lot of other missionaries from my generation, that phrase, it'd be better if I came home in a pine box, drove existential crisis. Like a lot of missionaries that I know now, I can look back and finally, after years, honestly say there were moments where I thought, no, it'd be better. That'd be, I don't know that I don't think I can hack it. I don't know if it's because I'm weak. I don't know if it's because I am a sinner. I don't know what the problem is here, but I'm not going to make it. And so I don't know if that's still pervasive in missionary culture. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I can I can mainly speak to my own mission experience, right? But obviously, I have a lot of friends from various places that served in various places, and I'd say that kind of sentiment is pretty much, in my experience, pretty much gone. Where I think I've heard that quote once or twice. I think I even discussed it with some of my mission friends one time, and we're like, yeah, that's kind of an unhealthy mindset. And so it's like I appreciate, well, on one hand, it's self-sacrifice is a beautiful concept, right? It's a beautiful principle. That's what Christ is, the ultimate embodiment of self-sacrifice for a greater good, right? And so on one hand, it's good, but at the same time, I'm not God in the flesh. And so something that was really drilled into me by both of my mission presidents, I had two wonderful mission presidents, was that concept in Mosiah 4, where it's like, don't run faster than you have strength, don't labor more than you can, right? And so it's like you've got to find this balance, this middle ground. And this is kind of generally what I found in my generation. And older people will call us soft or lazy or whatever, but I also think we're just more honest in terms of what we're able to do. And I think in doing that, we can be more efficient, even. So, and there's that other phrase, right? Who was it? Was it Hinckley that talked about it, where it's like, forget yourself and go to work, right? And again, I think that's I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good guiding principle. But I don't think that what that means is like literally never think about yourself. I think that's more of, as far as you are able, put your desires, your cares, your time, on the sacrificial altar for the benefit of other people. But when you have certain mental health things, or you need a second, or whatever it is, you're spiritually in need, you should probably attend to yourself before you go to other people. And there's this quote in Preach My Gospel that says, and I don't know where I stand on it. I talk about it with friends sometimes, but it says that, you can't convert people past your own conversion. And I forget if they took it out in the new one or not, but it's kind of an interesting idea. So if that's true, then you should probably figure your own spirituality and stuff out first, right, before you start go and try to convert other people, or at the very least can currently be spending a lot of time on your own beliefs and stuff like that, so you can more honestly, more genuinely help convert other people. But yeah, I'd say I do hear a lot of horror stories though from from other missions, where it's like kind of this idea does still pervade. But I'd say it's definitely, on the way out. And that's not to say that missionaries are getting lazy or things like that, but like, for example, when the church allowed missionaries to call every week their family, right? That's definitely an open move away from this. Forget your Back in the White Handbook, right? It said, put all thoughts of home or girlfriends or future out of your mind. That's absolutely not the mindset anymore. So
Oh, that's good. That's a fair point. I didn't really even consider that, to be honest with you. Well, I mean, I've been aware that things like some missionaries now are like they keep their Facebook accounts while they're on their missions, and then they like Facebook message their parents and their family and stuff. Like I've
oh yeah,
gotten Facebook messages from my nieces and nephews, and I'm like, "Are you okay? Is there something? Is there something going on?" Because like you're right. When in '99 to 2001. I could call home on Christmas and Mother's Day. That was it.
yeah.
And that's a pretty major change. Even just being able to email. I remember when I found out that they could email their parents. I was like, you can email your parents? What? So it's a pretty major, that is a pretty major difference. So that's good. And especially with, like you talked about, the loneliness is a pretty pervasive problem in our society now, and especially among young men. It's
Hmm.
deeply concerning.
Yeah.
And so the idea that maybe keeping connectivity with home open, communication with home more instantaneous, probably would help to diminish that culture of loneliness, because being a missionary is a pretty lonely experience. At least it was in my experience. So I'm glad to hear that. Actually, did you feel like there were resources that the church provides? And I'm not asking this as a challenge or anything. Again, I'm actually genuinely curious and hopeful. Did you find that, like, while you were in the field, that there was an understanding that if you need help, we will get it for you? You just have to, there's a process to ask for help.
Oh yeah, certainly. So like even from the MTC, there's this new, I don't know how new it is, but there's this newer resource called Adjusting the Missionary Life. And so it kind of has these different sections on what should I do if, I'm, uh, what are some examples? If I'm feeling, depressed, or what should I do if I'm feeling, I don't know, like horny, or what should I do if I'm feeling this way or that way? And it kind of has these suggestions for what to do. And there's also kind of this, um, I don't even know what to call it, but there's this thing like at the end of the resource that's describes like 4 different states of being. So you've got like the green zone, which means like you're doing super good, and you're doing all good. You've got like the orange zone, I think it was, where you're like, yeah, I'm not doing the best, but I'm still pretty good. And then you've got like, I don't remember if it jumps right to the red zone, but essentially there's these different like zones, and it's like make sure to self-assess yourself pretty frequently. And then I don't remember if this was a mission thing or like if it's in the actual resource, but it's like if you're 3 days or more in that red zone where you're like just not doing it, make sure to contact like your mission president and get something set up with him. So yeah, I think I didn't I didn't always find adjusting missionary life to be the best thing, but it's certainly a great step in the right direction, right? So
I hadn't heard about that, so that's interesting. I'll have to take a look at that. That's good to hear. If it is, if that's true, and
yeah,
if there are resources allocated for it, certainly the
yeah.
church has the money to pay for resources like that.
Yeah, and then also my first mission president had it was a obligatory thing. He had all the missionaries every year go through the church's emotional resilience program. So we take time out of our day and meet with our district and go through emotional resilience, which was pretty good too.
Emotion, is that like a manual, or is that just like a practice? What does that look like? Emotional resilience.
Yeah, I think it was a manual. It's kind of like the church's financial independence stuff. If you're familiar with that,
No,
no. Yeah, so it's
is
like
that
a.
new too?
I guess I don't know. I'm only 20, 21. I don't know.
Right, that's right. Man, you really are young. That's wild. Okay, yeah, I'll have to look into that. Well, I'm certainly excited to hear that that's the case. If that's true, I'm really hopeful that the church has figured some things out since our day, because I'm sure you have heard some horror stories. So, but you said that there's some horror stories you heard from other missions. When you first started into that, I thought you were talking about from my from Gen X, from my generation. But you're talking about concurrently. Now there are some horror stories, from people your age.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I suppose the term's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but just what I mean by that is just like I've heard of certain mission cultures or experiences that were very different from mine. My mission culture was very Christ-like. Like, there's not a single person from my mission, in terms of missionaries or senior couples or mission presidents and mission presidents' wives. I loved all of them, and so all of just very Christ-like, very humble people. I learned a lot from all of them, very talented. And so there was never this, because something I hear even still is kind of there's like these hierarchies, right? Where you've got like the APs and the ZLs, and like you're trying to be obedient and like suck up to the mission president and be a yes man and just like follow that path, which is very unfortunate because in my mission, that was not the case at all. Like the APs, usually whoever the AP was whoever was like really good friends with everybody was more or less usually kind of what it was. And so
Yeah.
everybody, leadership wasn't like this weird hierarchical structure where it's like, oh my goodness, the ZLs are here now, we gotta uh, pretend to be obedient and stuff. No, it was like everybody was real around everybody. Everybody loved everybody, and yeah, I mean it was pretty chill. So I I I haven't heard anything insane, but just I guess in terms of comparing my mission experience, which seems like almost like like a sanctuary, like this perfect place to be able to grow in your faith and learn life lessons. To hear that, to experience that, and then hear these other things where it's like the mission president super strict, and there's like this something I hear a lot is kind of this toxic obedience culture where it's like obedience trumps faith in Christ. Is something I almost hear pretty often, and this is something that I kind of preached against a lot of my mission. Not that it was ever really a problem, but I I just kind of heard other things from other places. So
Oh yeah. No, obedience culture. Yeah, toxic obedience culture. I mean, you're that could describe my entire Mormon experience.
yeah,
But then my mission, particularly, like we had this, there was this pervading belief. I'd be using pervading a lot in this story, in this conversation, but yeah, there was this enduring belief that if we were sinning and we didn't have our thoughts in our heads in the game, that's when God wouldn't send us baptisms. And in
yeah.
my generation and serving in South America, your success was very much determined by whether or not you were getting baptisms. Do you feel like that was true in Hungary? Was that a different culture in your mission in Hungary?
No, yeah. If you serve a mission in Hungary, you kind of quickly realize that there's no real correlation between obedience and baptisms or success. And so something my second mission president stressed a lot was we don't practice transactional obedience. You're not obedient in order to redeem some sort of baptismal reward or whatever. It's a transformational obedience. You're obedient because you love Christ, because you love the people, and you want to actually introduce them to some sort of way of life or religious system that will genuinely bless them. And in doing so and giving up your own time and efforts and things, you will be blessed as well. And so that was more of the idea, is that you don't obey to, it's not like this, like a cosmic vending machine, right? Where you're like, okay, here's my perfect obedience, giving my 10 baptisms, right? Because you can be perfectly obedient and hungry and still never see a baptism, right? And
Yeah.
so, and that was a great part of serving in Eastern Europe, was that um, I was fairly fundamentalist in some of my leanings before going on the mission, but being on the mission, everything was, all of those like presuppositions were challenged. Like, wait, why am I not seeing miracles because I'm being perfectly obedient? Why is this not happening because of this? I thought that if this happens, then this follows. And so it's like I was forced to really get out of that, simple fundamentalist sort of mindset pretty quickly.
Hmm. Did you find that was at a difference from like your MTC experience? Like how would you gauge that? Was it the same, or was there different? I guess I'm getting at is, do you find that your mission president was a big deal, and the culture that your mission president and your leadership were creating in Hungary that was unique to that, or do you feel it was more church wide?
Yeah, I definitely think it's more of a mission specific thing. And I have heard of other missions that are kind of similar, but yeah, the MTC was definitely more the classic, like exact obedience and uh, very legalistic. And so, but I mean, I do think generally though the church is moving in the direction of, no, let's not be like this. Let's be a little more, let's be more critical thinking, and let's be more on this transformational obedience side. Put our faith in Christ more than obedience or anything else. And I think we could see that even in like, have you read the New for Strength of Youth manual?
I've heard clips of it, but to be honest with you, I haven't read it.
You've got to read that. That was one of my favorite things I've seen the church do ever. Because like the old For Strength of Youth is like, don't do this, don't do this, don't date till you're 16, do this. If someone's doing this, it means they're blah blah blah. Now the modern For Strength of Youth manual is more like, here's a set of good principles. Now you go choose what you're going to do for yourself. And so I think the For Strength of Youth is, I hold it in my personal scriptural canon. That's how seriously I take it. And so I think that's generally the direction the church is moving, though, where it's more, the classic Joseph Smith quote, I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves, rather than imposing all these crazy strict rules and having people do them, right?
Sure. Oh, I love that. I'm learning all kinds of things. I got books I got to go acquire now. I have to stop by Deseret Book on my way home. It'll be the first time that's happened in a long time. My way home. I am home.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that's interesting. Do you mind my asking you, and you perfect liberty to tell me in the most Mormon or not Mormon way possible to Joe, go F yourself. Who was your mission president, or who were your mission presidents?
Yeah. So my first mission president was um, a guy from Florida, and he is an artist, and his wife is an actress. So that kind of sets the stage for the
Yes,
way
it
they
does.
operate, right? And
Sure.
so he was very, very much um, teach them correct principles and let them govern themselves. The when I yeah, it was very much he really trusted us, and then on top of that, he didn't have a lot of time to be with us because when I first got called, I got called to the Hungary Romania mission, and so my mission president was running the mission in Hungary, 2 districts of the church in Hungary, and in Romania there's no stake, so he was running the entire church in Romania as well, as mission president, because that's how the keys work, right? And so he was a lot of the time in Romania, a lot of the time elsewhere. So I didn't have as much of a personal connection with him, just due to the circumstances. But he was very much pretty um, liberal in his way of dealing with the missionaries, right? And so, um, yeah, because I remember asking him some stuff about obedience or about actually no, I remember one zone conference. I think it was my second or third zone conference, and I was like, okay, because coming into the mission, I was very much that exact obedience track, and I remember Sister Rucker, my first mission president's first mission leaders were the Ruckers. Sister Rucker did this training called Slow Down, and so she played. I don't know if you've heard the Sissel song with the Motab. It's called "Slow Down." It's a beautiful song based off of one of the Psalms, right? And
Mm.
so she played. They played the song for the zone training, and then she talked about how we need to not be rushing everywhere and really grinding and stuff. And she was like, just slow down, take a step back, and in doing so you'll be more efficient and you'll be better and stuff. And I was like flabbergasted. I was like, slow down. No, we need to be speeding up. And so that's very much how they were. And then my second set of mission leaders were the Walls, and they're still out there. And President Wall, he is a businessman, successful businessman who runs some companies out in Utah and elsewhere. But he kind of came in as well, um, um, kind of more on the exact obedience track. But he, a lot of the missionaries were coming from the Ruckers, these artists, and so we were not exactly expecting that. But and I mean, he wasn't crazy strict or anything, but he came in, I think, wanting to be stricter than he ended up being. And so, but I think when I left the mission, it was in a really really great place in terms of balancing, obedience, and really grinding and balancing. No, we're gonna make sure we're in a good place spiritually, and we're in a good place to be able to do this. So
Wow. That's cool, man. That's interesting. I'm gonna have to look into some of these books and things. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Because I have used up the hour that I asked you for. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet that you hoped we could touch on?
Um, I don't know. I'm a little bit curious about the Church of Korihor. How did you end up starting this thing, and what even is this thing?
Well, that's a bigger question than I think you want the answer to. So, but in brief, so the Church of Korihor is a spiritual community for godless people. I started it when I saw that a lot of ex-Mormons and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Scientologists, people who come from what we would say are high-demand religions, and leave only to find that they are lonely and without community on the other side. And in the Exmo world, I think you're aware. I don't know how much exposure you have to us. Um, I'll say this: Exmos are some of my favorite people in the world. We are a very toxic crew, though. And when you leave the church, I mean, there really is an angry phase. We call it the angry phase. Of course, that's where this phrase, I'm sure, still sticks around in Mormonism today, is that you can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. But that's because we got these years of trauma that you unwind, and there's no ceremony for it. Like I said, I wish that there was a funeral for my Heavenly Father, and there wasn't one, and that would have been really useful to me to like say, I need time to grieve, because I lost my confidant, I lost my my provider, my spiritual provider, I lost the the exemplar for my life, and nobody said anything. I didn't have a chance to speak and say something. And so I was like, and so I'm like looking, I'm like, there really is there's no spiritual path for people when they leave the church, and no spiritual community for people when they leave the church, especially those who become atheists, which is frankly most of us become atheists or agnostics, and which is an interesting thing in of itself. But I looked at it and I said, if we spent as much time as we do tearing down the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in building up a spiritual, at least one alternative spiritual community for the people who are the most poorly, who have been the most mistreated, who are and or who have had the most difficult spiritual crisis, in my perspective, which is the atheists and agnostics like me. If we spent that as much time as we spend tearing down a church that, from my perspective, is actively trying to tear itself down, and put that instead on trying to build the church, trying to build a community up, and say, this is built on completely different principles that you as an atheist would get around, but it also involves getting together and singing songs and having, ritual practices and forming relationships, forming friendships, and creating community. That would really soften the blow for people like, who had an experience like mine. In addition to that, it provides the additional benefit of allowing people to get excommunicated from the church, because I don't know if you're how aware you are of this, but long before you even went on your mission, there was this website launched by an attorney here in Utah. This is called quitmormon.org. And basically, it was an expedited way to saber rattle at the church and say, let me leave the church without excommunicating me, and to process resignations. We learned in the last couple of years that the church isn't honoring all of those. And it's been a bit of a problem, because if you get to the point, most Exmos don't actually leave the church. I don't know if you know this, but they just stick around, go, still members of record. And, it's estimated I think that they've decided it's like 30% of the members of record are actual active attending members, which, that's, I don't actually think that's much different than it has ever been, to be honest with you. And I grew up when we used to celebrate when the church got to I think 6 million or something like that back in the 80s. And I'm like, wow, we're really, really getting to be a pretty big deal. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. People are starting to notice us, right? And but I look at that and I looked at that and I said, well, I got excommunicated. But is this really the first time I've done one of these? In the Ex-Mormon world, I have a bit of a reputation for pulling out my. I framed my letter of excommunication, and now I've said it.
Oh, really?
But I pull it out every chance I get to talk about how much I love my excommunication. My court of love is one of the best spiritual experiences I've ever had, and I loved it. I thought it was great. But then Korihor is kind of my. I call Korihor my exemplar. I think Korihor is awesome. When people called me Korihor when I first stopped practicing the faith, I'm like, I love it. What's your problem with Korihor? Korihor is the bomb. And so, anyways, so that's the catalyst of how we decided, you know what, we're going to form a community. And I said, the priesthood manual says, when I asked basically to be excommunicated, my stake president almost tried to dodge out of it. And he told me, he's like, we don't have anything to excommunicate you for. I'm like, oh, you just ask away. I've done it. If you want a reason for me to get kicked out of the church. And he's like, let me ask you this. Are you addicted to porn? And I said, no. And he's like, you're not? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no. I'm like, why? And he's like, well, it's adultery. We could excommunicate you for adultery. And I was like, for looking at porn? I'm like, President Mitchell, do you think members of your stake aren't looking at porn? And he's like, not in our stake. I'm like,
Yeah.
Okay. And I said, I'll tell you what, you're not going to get anywhere with that. So let's go to apostasy. And he said, well, you can't get kicked out for apostasy unless you join another church.
Mm.
And I said, tell that to September 6th.
Yeah.
Tell that to John DeLynn, who was at that point under review. You tell it to Kate Kelly about that same time. The church absolutely kicks people out for. He's like, yeah, but you have to do something serious. I said, like, tell other people something that causes them to leave the church. And he's like, right. And I said, I've done that. Dozens of people. I've told them, you want to know some things about Joseph Smith? Let me tell you some things about Joseph Smith. And 2-3 weeks later, read a document. This is before the CES letter. This is before I wrote the Korihor argument. I was just telling, I would tell somebody, you got to look down this rabbit hole. And 2 or 3 weeks later, 2 or 3 months later, 2 or 3 years later, yeah, guess what, Joe? I left the church. It's like, yep, here we go. And so, I was pretty toxic about that for a while. I'm just not passionate about that anymore, but I have done it. But then I said, you know what? We need an opportunity for people to be able to say, I'm an atheist. I'm godless. That's enough reason for you to decide that I'm an apostate. But because there's no atheist church for them to join so that they can put it on paper and say, here it is, boom, I am a godless person. I reject your God. I reject your Christ. I reject all these teachings. I fully reject it. Kick me out of the rolls of your church. Because there's no organization to do that, I said, let's just make one. And we'll call it, I'm like, if the Satanic Temple would be more careful about it, they could pull that off, but that's not their passion. So I said, okay, so we're making our own version of Satanic Temple, if you will. Satanic Temple, I don't know how much you know about this, but they're not actually Satanists. Don't tell anyone. It's just between you and me and the internet. The Satanic Temple is just a bunch of atheists who just, use the whole Satan thing to kind of stick it in the eye to religion. But I said we kind of need something like that, but for people who leave the Mormon Church and other churches, because other churches have a similar role. If you join another church with competing values, you're out, you're excommunicated. So that was the catalyst of what became the Church of Korihor. That answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I did ask you only for an hour. I've gone over that now. I do very much appreciate it. LJ, tell us again, how do we find your podcast?
Yeah, just either on YouTube or Spotify. You can look up the Rational Theology Podcast with LJ Saurman. The logo's yellow, like stained glass brain. So yeah.
I like that part. I don't know if you can tell, but we're a pretty geeky crew here at the Church of Korihor. Do a lot of brain worship here. So I like that. I like that a lot. Not that, I'm sure LJ is a good everybody, for all you Mormons out there. This is a nice young man who is a very good representation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who are Christians. You evangelicals out there, they are. And LJ is proof of it, in my opinion. So I want to thank LJ for being on the show today. If you're open to it, maybe next time we have a friendly conversation that can bend towards something less friendly, if you want, and I think it'd be fun. At least I know I'd be dealing with somebody who can handle it.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Okay, thank you very much, and LJ, flash bright, my friend.
Thank you.